And whether you know it or not, you are at the Fall from the Book Festival.
The more you know.
Which may be the best literary festival you never heard of. We have been doing it for 17 years now. And along the way, I started working in concert with some other people, some awards to recognize writers who encouraged reading or writers who gave a lot back to the community, that kind of thing. And that's become part of the mainstay of one of the things we do. This year, you're on basically opening night. The festival runs through Saturday. Ernest Gaines, author of A Lesson Before Dying, is going to appear in Eagle Bank Arena, formerly known as the Patriot Center, tomorrow evening. Every freshman member of the campus community has been given this book and told to read it and come tomorrow night, which is why we ended up in the Eagle Bank Arena. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to do, foster reading and a culture of reading, and of course you value that or you wouldn't be here. We also have Tim O'Brien, the author of, who is going to appear on Saturday, the closing day of the festival. If you didn't get a printed program, or if you're a member of the electronic population, I've come to value this. We have an app. You can download it onto your phone and use that to build your own program and figure out where things are. We have a lot of venues, not just on the Fairfax campus. We are just throughout the region, and it's just a wide variety, and so it's best to encourage you to either get the program and look at it, or download the app and build your own schedule. As I mentioned, we have a lot of partners. The City of Fairfax is one of our major partners. George Mason, of course, is our home, but we are somewhat independent of the university, which is why we have a lot of off-campus partners. We are sustained by fundraising, basically. So feel free to stop by in the lobby after and inquire about the Friends organization. A minor donation there will get you VIP receptions and other kinds of insider information, as well as off-cycle events that we will be putting on in the spring. So now, just to sort of give you a rundown of what we're going to do, I'm going to get out of the way in about another minute and a half. We will have the presentation of the Mason Award, which is what tonight begins with. And then, of course, we'll have our featured presenter. After that, I'll come back with cards. Sorry, but I have to come back. With cards, those cards that you guys filled out when you were in line. We have a staff of well-read, highly paid volunteers. One person who is going through those like a mad woman, and is taking out the duplicates and stuff like that, so that we can have a really meaningful question and answer. And I'm sorry to do it that way, but this house doesn't lend itself to actually taking questions from the floor. So we're going to do that. And if we have some time, we actually may let you shout one up from the floor if we haven't covered everything. When we're all done, we will have a signing in the auditorium, in the lobby, and we will have a few rules about that, but I'll bore you with those later. So, without further ado, I told you I'd be gone in a minute and a half. Let me bring out Brian Engler from the Fairfax Library Foundation to make the presentation of the award.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Bill said, I'm Brian Engler, and I welcome you to the 2015 Mason Award presentation at the 17th Annual Fall for the Book Literary Festival. Mason Award was established by the Board of Directors of the Fall for the Book to recognize authors who've made extraordinary contributions to bringing literature to a wide reading public. The award is named for George Mason, one of our nation's founding fathers, and for whom this university also is named. Author of the Virginia Declaration of Rights and known as the father of the Bill of Rights, Mason served as an early proponent of the right to speak freely. The Mason Award serves as a reminder of George Mason's ideals and efforts and celebrates the freedom of speech that he helped secure. Previous winners of the Mason Award include Dave Eggers, Jonathan Leatham, Chinua Achebe, Sherman Alexie, Greg Mortensen, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, David Baldacci, and Jodi Picoult. A stellar litany indeed. The Fairfax Library Foundation is proud to sponsor the Mason Award. As chair of the Foundation's board of directors, I want to thank all of the businesses and caring individuals whose gifts allow us to support the library, to implement our Ready to Read and Changing Lives Through Literature programs, and to sponsor special events such as this one. The Fairfax Library Foundation is a nonprofit, charitable, and educational organization that allows book lovers like you to take part in enhancing library services through volunteerism, private donations, estate and planned giving, our annual Library Jubilee that takes place this year on October 17th, not too far away, and more. Your contributions of time and money ensure that the library upholds its reputation for excellence now and well into the future. If you enjoy this presentation and others like it, there are many ways to support the Fairfax Library Foundation. Just visit our website at www.fairfaxlibraryfoundation.org or pick up a brochure on your way out if there are any out there. Now on with the show. If you haven't already done so, please turn off or silence your cell phones. And please help us improve the festival for next year by filling out a survey. The information we collect from these helps us to better serve you in the future, so thank you in advance. As Bill mentioned, there will be a book signing after this event at the book sales table in the lobby outside of the concert hall. Thank you to the George Mason Campus Bookstore, and of course to the author for doing this. At this time, it's my very great pleasure to present the 2015 Mason Award to internationally best-selling novelist Diana Gabaldon. The author getting warmed up here. The author of the award-winning #1 New York Times best-selling Outlander novels, described by Salon magazine as the smartest historical sci-fi adventure romance story ever written by a science PhD with a background in scripting Scrooge McDuck comics. The 8-book series from 1991's Outlander through 2014's Written in My Own Heart's Blood boasts more than 26 million copies in print worldwide and includes a non-fiction companion volume, The Outlandish Companion, as well as numerous novellas and short stories. She's also written several books in a sub-series featuring Lord John Grey, who, as everyone here knows, is a character from the main series, and a graphic novel, The Exile, which is set within the Outlander universe. Dr. Gabaldon has 3 degrees in science, a BS in zoology, an MS in marine biology, and a PhD in quantitative behavioral ecology, and spent 12 years as a university professor before writing fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Diana Gabaldon.
Well, thank you so much. It's awfully kind of so many of you to come out here when you could be home washing your car or otherwise enjoying the delights of the season. Anyway, my great thanks to George Mason University for the handsome award. It's delightful. thing. It's a good cause, and we're all for making people read more books. So we're all behind that. I actually did this event only because my sister lives here. She lives in Virginia, and I live on the other side of the country, so I always take speaking engagements that are near where she is, so we can see each other. Having done so, though, I was really pleased to find out that it was for a good award and so forth. And as the Random House person says, and they're paying you $10,000. I should probably tell you that I don't actually accept honorariums for speaking. That is, I allow people to pay the money, but they don't pay it to me. I have it donated directly to an organization called Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, which is an organization that supports a line of orphanages in Latin America. Thanks very much. So when they get this money, I'll tell them they must buy books with it. All of them to be reading as well. Anyway, it's lovely to see you here tonight. They were telling me earlier that Stephen King had played here recently and so forth, had a huge crowd, and that he was rather nervous ahead of time. He was saying, well, I hope nothing happens. I hope they'll be all right. And they were expressing some doubt as to the number of my crowd. I said, you're also enthusiastic. And I said, Stephen's fans are a lot stranger than mine. I don't really think you need to worry. So they're very enthusiastic, but they're not dangerous. A year ago, January, I met Sam Hewen and Katrina Balfe for the first time when we we did the Television Critics Association thing, and then we did the first ever fan event in Los Angeles for 2,500 people, all of them just even more enthused than you are. Especially when Sam sat down in the front row, forgetting that he was not wearing anything under his kilt. But they were blown away by the enthusiasm of all the fans, and they were saying, this is amazing, you think we were rock stars. And I said, well, don't look now, you actually are. I said, well, you met the fans, and they love you, they'll go on loving you as long as you don't do anything stupid, and I'm sure you won't. And I said, I have never had a bad fan experience. I've never been stalked, I've never had an aggressive fan or anybody who made me slightly uncomfortable. I said, they tend all to be kind of benign nuts. But I said, the thing is, I think that we have such good fans. They're all, educated, literate, compassionate, and civil. And I think that's because people with mental derangements don't have the attention span to read one of my books. So you see, you've all been self-selected for sanity. And I did say, now, once you're on television, anybody can watch television. So the minute the show goes live, start looking over your shoulder. But even they have been, just astonished at, at the high level of the fandom, you might say. You guys are great. Thank you so much. Anyway, what people, you mentioned my various degrees in my previous incarnation as a scientist. What people most usually ask me when they're interviewing me is, well, beyond how did you get the idea to write these books, which is pretty simple. I've known since I was 8 years old that I was a novelist. I just didn't know how. And I came from a very conservative family background. My father would say to me, you're such a poor judge of character, you're bound to marry some bum. So be sure you get a good education so you can support your family. With this going on at home, I thought I would not announce that I wanted to write novels because, it's not a very financially stable profession. And instead I went into science, and I was good at science, I liked it, but I still knew I wanted to write books. And when I turned 35, I said, well, Mozart was dead at 36, maybe you better get a move on here. And so I made up my mind to write a book starting on my next birthday. Because up to this point, they asked me if I wanted to walk around, and I said I did, so I better do it. And up to this point, I had read or written all kinds of things from Walt Disney comic books up to and including scholarly articles, PhD dissertations, textbooks, documentation, tutorials. I started a scientific journal called Science Software, which was for scientists who use computers in their work. And I wrote then reviews for Byte and InfoWorld and all kinds of stuff. Basically anything anybody would pay me for. because, well, I did not marry a bum. I married a very nice man, whom I still have 43 years later. Now, we should, at this point, pause and recognize Davina Porter and her lovely husband, Gus. I mentioned not only because Davina is the wonderful audiobook narrator who does the audiobooks, but because they've been married 53 years. The Pope would be very proud of us. Anyway, as I say, I didn't marry a bum. I married a very nice man. But he didn't like to work for other people, and he quit his job 3 months after our first child was born to start his own business. And I will say that in terms of financial stability, there's not that much to choose between an entrepreneur and a bum. So for several years, I was our sole support, and we kept on having children. So they don't pay assistant professors and scientists that much. And so I was forced to think of other ways of making an income other than taking in prostitution in the home. I tell writers' workshops occasionally, I say, the oldest profession is prostitution. Storytelling is the second oldest. Said we have it all over the first oldest one. If you're a writer, you can do it to a lot of people at once. Well, I mentioned the teaching earlier because, the word pedagogy, which is basically instruction, teaching, and so forth, well, that comes from the Greek word to walk while looking, or to search while walking. And that is because in the early days of Greek education, Socrates and Aristotle and those people tended to walk around in the open air with their students, expounding philosophy, looking at the natural world, and so forth. Well, there's actually a reason to this other than not being able to afford seats. And that is that human beings evolved as both predator and prey. That is, we eat meat, we're carnivores and omnivores, but things also would eat us. And so we evolved under circumstances where if you heard a rustling in the leaves, you would look at it quickly to see if it was a lizard or something that you could eat. If you caught a flicker of motion behind your shoulder, you'd whirl around to see if there was a bear sneaking up on you. Consequently, humans are hardwired to respond to motion. Any kind of motion. If something moves in your vicinity, you'll look. The car ahead of you swerves, you jerk your head and would lock your steering wheel. And you look at anything that moves. This is how reality TV works. I'm not kidding here. If you see people in a restaurant where there's a TV going, they will be looking at the TV, no matter what stupid thing is on it. The sound's off, it doesn't matter. It's moving, it's flickering, and therefore their eyes fix on it. Okay, you will remember every word I'm saying because I'm walking back and forth in front of you while I'm saying it. I'm not kidding. You will. I will pause periodically to drink Diet Coke, though. Anyway, as I was saying, I became our sole support and needed an extra job. Well, thanks to what I had been doing at the university, I sort of slid sideways and become an expert in scientific computation. It's really easy to be an expert if there's only 6 people in the world who do what you do, which was my position at the time. And so I said, well, I know how to do this, I can put sentences together, why not? So I decided to try writing for the computer press. So I wrote a very brief query letter to Byte and InfoWorld and the editors of all the other magazines I could think of, and I closed with it a copy of my Science Software Quarterly, and also a copy of a comic book I had written for Walt Disney entitled Nutrition Adventures with Orange Bird. Orange Bird was this little thing thought up by the Florida Citrus Council. He was an orange and had little green wings, and he didn't talk, he thought in picture balloons, which made him very hard to write dialogue for. He did win me a Family Circle magazine award, though, for Best Educational Media of the Year. However, I closed this with my query letter, which said briefly, Dear Sirs, as you can see from the enclosed, you won't find anyone who knows more about scientific and technical software than I do, and at the same time can write so as to appeal to a broad popular audience. Well, this worked immediately, and so I got assignments, and within a year I was freelancing to the extent that I had doubled my salary, which, as I say, is not that much of a feat considering what they pay assistant professors. But, it was at this point where I had 2 full-time jobs and 3 children under the age of 6 that I decided to write a novel. Now, this was clearly insane, but I never let that stop me. And I was sane enough not to tell anyone what I was doing. I said, I want to write a book for practice. I need to learn how to write a novel. And I think the only way to do that is actually to write a novel. Because no one had ever shown me how to write Walt Disney comic books or software reviews or any of this stuff. I had just written one or two and looked at at examples, and if what I wrote didn't look enough like what I was looking at, I'd poke it till it did. And I said, okay, you've been reading novels for 30-odd years. Surely if you write one, you will recognize it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to write a novel. What I need to know is just what does it take to write a novel? I mean, this is a big job. It may be even longer than a PhD thesis, though, mind you, my PhD thesis was 400 pages. It was entitled Nest Site Selection in the Pinyon Jay, Gymnorhinus cyanocephalus. Or, as my husband says, why birds build nests where they do, and who cares anyway? Well, my first job at the university, the one that caused me to become an inadvertent computer expert, was in analyzing the contents of bird gizzards and writing Fortran programs to produce graphs. But the upshot of this was an 800-page monograph entitled The Dietary Habits of the Birds of the Colorado River Valley. So you can kind of see the trend here, 400 pages, 800 pages, And so, anyway, I said, okay, well, writing a novel is a big job, but I'm not intimidated by that. What I need to know is what does it take in terms of mental commitment and, daily discipline and mental organization and research and, all the other things that might go into writing a novel. And the only way to figure that out is to do it. So, okay, I'm going to write a novel. Next question was, what kind of book shall I write? Because I read everything, and lots of it. This is why no one's ever been able to describe my books. It's because I wrote the first one never intending anyone to read it. And consequently, I used anything that I liked, and I liked everything. So they call it eclectic. That's the good word for it. Yeah. So anyway, I said, okay, it was the easiest kind of book to write. And after a bit of thought, I said, well, for me, perhaps historical fiction. I was a research professor, and I knew my way around the library. Said it seems easier to look things up than to make them up, and if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record, which, works actually pretty well. So I said, all right, historical novel. I'm trying not to fall off my high heels. If you see me swaying, it's not because I'm intoxicated. Or if I was, that would be a good excuse. But I sweated it all out at the cocktail party. Yes, anyway, I said, I decided to write historical fiction. So the next question was, where shall I set this? Because I've got no background in history, just the 6 hours of Western civilization they make you take as an undergraduate. And so, one time would do as well as another. I'd have to look it all up anyway. So I was thinking, Venice, 15th century, American Civil War, what sounds interesting here? And in this malleable frame of mind, I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. Yeah, I have a few Whovians in the audience. To save you all asking the question, my favorite Doctor is David Tennant. However, the show I was watching when I first became acquainted was Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor. This was a really old show, shot more than 50 years ago. And in it, the Doctor had picked up a young companion, a young Scotsman from 1745. And this was a young man who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's fetching. I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church, and I said to myself, you want to write a book, it really doesn't matter where you set it. The important thing is pick a point, get started. So I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no outline, no plot, no characters, nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt. Which is, of course, a very powerful and compelling image. And, we do have at least one or two gentlemen in kilts here, besides Jeff, the great piper who brought me on. You notice that he has retired tactfully to the wings. You're going to see him while I tell these next stories. It's a very powerful and compelling image. The sixth book, Breath of Snow and Ashes, was a very lucky book for me. It opened up #1 on the bestseller lists of a number of different countries. And it also won me the Corina International Prize for Fiction, which sounds very spiffy, but it's a German prize, and I had to go to Bavaria to accept it. I'm laughing because of what happened with that prize. It had to do with Bavarian TV. They held it in the little opera house there, which is newly restored. They were very proud of it. They said it was restored, just like it was in the 18th century, down to the wooden folding seats without cushions. So fine. Well, they mic'd everybody up ahead of time. Actually, they were very exacting about this. They made us all dress up in the clothes we were going to wear to the awards ceremony and come show ourselves to the mistress of ceremony so she could see if we were respectable enough to be on her stage. Luckily, she approved of my outfit, and so I was cleared. They also hired a fleet of black Audi A8s to transport us. The thing was, we were all backstage anyway, so we left through the side door of the theater, got into our appointed Audi, and were driven ceremoniously around to the front of the theater. Where we all got out onto the red carpet, and these are Germans. We have our ways. And anyway, the ceremony was very nice. They had me mic'd up with 2 mics rather than just one. One was for me to talk into, and the other was to listen through, because it was all in German, and so it was being translated for me so I could hear what was going on. Well, I was sitting there squirming around in my wooden seat as they went through the program, because I was the last one on the program. And, I was squirming for obvious reasons, but it was when they called my name and I leaped up to go up on stage that I realized that one of my transmitter boxes had worked its way loose and had dropped down into the slot between the seat and the back. And so I'm standing there in the aisle going, while the television dolly was coming in. Anyway, I got it out just in time, but I didn't have time to stuff it back in my pants on Bavarian TV, so I ran up on stage holding it in my hand with the hope that people would think it was a stylish evening bag. Evidently they either did or were too polite to say otherwise. But anyway, the actual point of why I began telling you this is that while I was in Germany for this award, I was interviewed numerous times during that week. The publisher sent me to every magazine they could think of, every newspaper, every tabloid, every half hour for an entire week. I was answering questions about the books. Well, toward the end of this week, I was talking to a nice gentleman who had a literary magazine. He had read all the books, he said, and he just loved my work. He said, your imagery is magical, your narrative drive is tremendous, your characters are so 3D. And I'm thinking, yes, go on. And instead, he paused and he said, there's just this one question. Could you tell me, what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? Well, he wasn't German. And anyway, I was really tired, or I might not have said it, but I just looked at him and I said, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute. One of the bizarre side effects of social media is Twitter. And you can find yourself talking to anyone about anything suddenly. Well, over the last couple of weeks, I have oddly enough found myself on bantering terms with William Shatner. Anyway, for reasons best known to themselves. So, but I told this story at the Renaissance Festival yesterday, and someone who was also talking to Bill Shatner tweeted a version of that last remark to him about the effect of men in kilts. And he'd been having an argument with Sam Hewen about the merits of wearing kilts or not. And I told him that. They said, I could get behind that. Yes, I haven't thought of a good reply to that one yet. Anyway, as you say, very powerful and compelling image. So I had my man in a kilt, but nothing else. So I went immediately to the library and began looking up things about Scotland in the 18th century. Well, all I knew about novels was that they should have conflict. And I said, okay, looking for conflict here. Well, you don't do that in Scotland in the 18th century very long without turning up Bonnie Prince Charlie in the Jacobite Rising. And I said, well, that looks like plenty of conflict. We'll use that. Fine. And I said, it looks, on the basis of 3 days research, like it was the Scots versus the English. I must have a lot of Scotsmen, of course, because of the kilt factor. But I think it would be a good idea to have a female character to play off these guys. If I make her an English woman, then we will have lots of conflict. So I said, okay. And on the third day, I introduced this English woman. No idea who she was, what she was doing in the story, how she got there. But I loosed her into a cottage full of Scotsmen to see what she'd do. And there were a bunch of them sitting by the hearth, muttering to each other. They turned around and stared at her. And I'm thinking, why does she look funny? What's going on? Anyway, one of them drew himself up and he said, my name's Dougal Mackenzie, and who might you be? And without me stopping to think, I just typed, "My name's Clara Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you?" I said, "Well, you don't sound at all like an 18th century person." So I just started trying to beat her into shape, and fought with her for several pages. She wasn't having any. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. And she also took over and started telling the story herself. So at this point I said, well, no one's ever going to see this. It doesn't matter what bizarre thing I do. Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later. So it's all her fault that there's time travel in these books. Well, the next question, of course, is how did you get published? If this was a book you didn't expect anyone to read, which I didn't. As I say, I wasn't expecting anyone to read it, and I didn't expect anyone to know about it, including my husband. I hadn't told him what I was doing either. Because of the 2 full-time jobs and the 3 children, he would have tried to stop me. Not out of any objection to my writing a book, but out of fear that I would drop dead. So I just knew, he'd say, wait till the kids are in school, wait till I made more money and you can quit one of your jobs. And I just knew if I didn't do it right then, I might never do it. So I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. I'm not going to tell anyone. The other reason was that I wanted to figure it out for myself. I didn't want people saying, oh, you must do it this way, or no, that's not right, and so forth. I wanted to learn how by doing it, because that's the way I'd always learned how to write, was just by looking at things and trying it, and that's how you learn. This is still true, by the way. You can read all the books about writing you want or take all the classes you want. Nothing will teach you to write except the act of putting words on the paper, which is at once extremely exhilarating and extremely horrifying. But you learn how to do that if you want to be a writer. So anyway, I kind of knew this, and so I didn't tell him. I just began working quietly. Well, now, meanwhile, I must digress back to the software writing reviews and things like that. There's a reason I write long books. It's because I like digressions. But I one day got a copy of a software product from Byte magazine, and they sent along with it a trial membership to CompuServe. And they said this particular vendor has a support forum on CompuServe for this particular software, and they would like you to check it out and mention it in your review. I said, okay, fine. So I signed up. This was back in the days when they charged you $30 an hour to be connected, so 5 free hours online, wow. The web did not exist. There were 3 information services besides the government stuff. There were Genie, Delphi, and CompuServe, which included a lot of what were then called special interest groups or forums, where people with a passion for old cars or gardening, or in this case books, would hang out together. So anyway, I went online, found the support forum, wrote the review. Well, I had 4 hours of free connect time left. And I said, well, I'm not Scottish, but I'm not wasting $120 either. What else is in here? So I began poking around to see what there might be. And I stumbled into the literary forum. Now, these were a bunch of people who liked books. There were a number of writers there, both published and unpublished, but mostly it was just people who liked to talk about books and writing. And for someone with 2 full-time jobs and 3 small children, it was the ideal social life. So I began thinking around there. I signed up, got automated software so I didn't go broke, and would sort of use that as my substitute coffee break. If I was working late at night, I'd pause between jobs and log on for a few minutes, collect my messages, read them, go back to work, log on a half hour later, upload messages, and so forth. Well, I was doing this one night after I had been writing my book in secret for about 8 months. And as I was logging on and off, I was having a desultory argument with a gentleman about what it feels like to be pregnant. Yes, I'm wondering how she did that with her hands. I also want to know how she told the kilt joke. Unfortunately, I can't watch her and talk at the same time. Yes, and I apologize if your fingers are falling off. Anyway, this was an ideal company, but I was not telling the people that I knew on the literary forum what I was doing either, because I had seen a number of people kind of come through there talking about projects they had in mind. Oh, I'm going to write a book about this, and I'm going to do this, and so on. And you would never actually see a word of what they thought they were writing. They would just talk about it. Well, I had seen the number of the published writers kind of electronically rolling their eyes when people pulled this kind of thing. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write something, and I'll see if I want to tell anyone about it. So I was just keeping quiet, walking along. But when I had this argument with the gentleman about being pregnant, he said, oh, I know what that's like. My wife's had 3 children. And I laughed. And I said, yeah, Buster, I've had 3 children. And he said, well, can you tell me what it's like? I said, I can, yes, but it's sort of complex. I don't know that I could fit it in a 30-line message slot, which is what we had. I said, but I have this little piece that I wrote a few months ago in which a young woman tells her brother in some detail what it's like to be pregnant. I said, I'll put that in the library here and you can read it. So I did. And everyone who'd been following the argument went and read this piece. And they came rushing back and said, this is cool, what is it? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, where's the beginning? And I said, I haven't written that yet. And they said, well, put up some more of it. This is fascinating. We want to know more about these people. And so every time I had a scene that would kind of stand by itself, I would put it up for them. And people got more and more interested. And they kept saying, well, this is neat. You know, what kind of book is this? And I would say, I have no idea. And they then started saying, well, you should try and publish it. I said, well, I think you really ought to know what kind of book it is before you ask someone to publish it. But, you know, for the sake of argument, eventually I want to publish a book. You know, what do you think I should do? Well, a lot of these people, as I say, were published authors, and they were very kind about sharing their expertise and their stories. And so they all said to a man, get a good literary agent. I can't do that one-handed. Anyway, they said get a good literary agent. They said an agent can do two things for you. He or she can get your manuscript read much more quickly than if you're sending it to a slush pile, which is true. Slush piles are in fact largely composed of slush. And the good news is that if you've written a halfway decent book, you will probably get it looked at seriously. Because you know, people do in fact write their memoirs in neon Sharpie on a yellow pad and send it to a house that publishes cookbooks. I mean, they really do. I've seen slush piles. So, you know, it's not that hard. It's not that easy either, but it's not that hard. The problem is that it may take 2 years for an editor to work his or her way down through the slush pile and get anywhere near you. So if it comes in from an established literary agent who they know that manuscript has kind of been pre-screened. That is, it is actually legible, literate, and it might even be something they want. They also know that an agent would be sending it to multiple other houses, and they don't want to be beat out. So they'll jump immediately on a manuscript that comes from a reputable agent. I said, okay, this makes sense. And they said the other thing is that if the manuscript does sell, the agent can negotiate a much better contract for you than you could do by yourself. I said, okay. This also turns out to be true owing to the genius of my first agent, who held on to every right he could. When Sony came along to make a deal with me finally for the TV series, I still owned my t-shirt rights and my action figure rights. Yes, my husband says he can't wait to see the Black Jack Randall action figure. I'll have to see. Yeah, I haven't seen any action figures as yet. I have seen something called a Funko Pop doll, yeah, which are these little things with round heads and extremely odd-looking faces. Yeah, Katrina Balfs has no mouth, which you thought was very insulting. At the San Diego Comic-Con, the advertising executives had brought the only extant set of these dolls, and we had Jamie and Claire and Frank and Black Jack Randall, and it was Dougal. That was the fifth one. So I was backstage, and they wanted to take them on stage, and then there was some sort of business about, you know, copyright or breaching confidentiality. They decided we couldn't take them on stage for the panel, so I was taking pictures of them backstage with the respective actors holding them. So I handed Katrina hers, and she held it up on. But they're very cute. I'll have to see what else happens. They call me up periodically and tell me all about their merchandising ideas, but I forget them immediately. Oh, they're making, the American Bear Company is making Jamie and Claire bears. So, it's the only thing that sticks in my mind. So anyway, where was I with this? It'll come back to me. Anyway, literary agents, yes, exactly. So anyway, it was only owing to the perspicacity of my first agent that I still owned all those rights. So I said, obviously, it's a good idea to have a literary agent. Okay, how do you find one? They said, well, different ways. You can read Writer's Digest magazine. They keep lists of agents. You can join one of the writers' organizations, like the Romance Writers of America, Rocky Mountain Science Fiction Writers, any of these special genre organizations, you know, the International Thriller Writers Organization. They keep lists of agents who, you know, have a good business rating and who specialize in that genre, or at least accept it. I said, or you can go to writers' conferences and talk directly to agents, perhaps pitch your book idea to one and get a foot in the door that way. They said, or you could just talk to people who have agents. And what were the 2 jobs and the 3 children? I said, well, that seems like the most reasonable thing to do. So I just started, whenever I was talking to someone who I knew was a published writer, I would ask them about agents. I'd say, do you have an agent? Is it the same agent you started with? If it's not, why not? An 11-year-old one. My first agent unfortunately died, or he would still be my agent. He was a much older gentleman who I'm afraid died of Alzheimer's, but he was my agent for many years, and a very good one too. Anyway, I said, cool, how do I find an agent? And they began telling me all this. Well, I began zeroing in on this one gentleman, my beloved first agent, whose name was Perry Norton. And I knew a few things about him. He was a very A-list kind of agent. I wanted someone who could get the attention of editors. I wanted someone who lived in New York and had lunch with editors and things like that. He represented a number of best-selling authors, including several of my friends from the forum. And I had learned from some of them that he was not afraid of unorthodox books or very long books, both of which I had, or so I thought, and I was right. And so I said, well, he sounds like a good bet, but I had also learned that he didn't take unsolicited queries. And so I didn't know how to get at him. And I was saying, well, just go on asking questions. You're not finished writing the book. Sooner or later, you'll either figure out how to get at him, or you'll find another agent who's easier. And so I just went on asking questions. And one day I was talking to a man named John Stith, who writes science fiction mysteries. And I said, I'm asking everyone about agents. John, do you have one? And he said, well, I do. Yeah, his name is Perry Norton. By coincidence, the same as, so-and-so's agent. And I said, oh, interesting. And he said, I know you're about ready to look for your own agent. Would you like me to recommend you to Perry? I said, well, that would be very nice, John. So I was afraid John would leave CompuServe or be run over by a bus before I finished the book. So I said, yes, go on, ask him. So John wrote a nice letter recommending me to Perry, saying, I know this woman, she's hilarious, people love her stuff, and I think she's worth looking at. I followed that with my own query letter. And in fact, someone asked me at lunch, did I have a lot of trouble, thinking up a query letter or pitching my book? And I said, no, because I never actually did that. My query letter was very short. It said, Dear Mr. Norton, I've been writing and selling nonfiction by myself for some years now. But now that I'm writing a novel, I understand that I really need good literary representation. You've been recommended to me by John and Judy and Carolyn and all these people whose opinions I respect. I said, I have this very long historical novel. I don't want to waste your time. Would you be willing to read excerpts from it? I didn't tell him I wasn't through writing it. Excerpts were all I had. He very kindly called back and said, yes, he would read my excerpts. So I hastily typed up a 26-page, single-spaced synopsis. A synopsis is supposed to be like 2 pages, double-spaced. And I sent it with my bundle of excerpts. And he took me on the basis of an unfinished first novel, which is not at all usual. And it was very lucky then, very lucky now. But he did. And 6 months later, I finally finished writing the book. And I sent it to him and called to tell him it was coming. And I said, as I have finished this book, I understand that there's more to this story. I'm not through with these people. I don't know if anyone will be interested in this, but if they are, you can tell them that I think there's more. And so I also told him that I would be coming to New York the next week for a scientific conference. And he said, as I'd hoped, you'll come up to the office so we can meet, because we'd never met each other face to face. It had all been done over the phone. And so the next week I found my way through the subway to his office, went up in some trepidation of mind, because at this point, he was the only person in the world who had read the book, and I didn't know what he thought about it. So, as I say, he turned out to be a charming older gentleman who took me back to his office, got me a Diet Coke, and was trying to put me at my ease by chatting to me about some of his other clients. His conversation was not as reassuring as he probably thought, because at this point I found out that he, in addition to my CompuServe friends, he also represented Tony Hillerman, Frederick Forsyth, and Robertson Davies, and the estate of Ayn Rand, but not that that counts. Anyway, so I was sort of flabbergasted. But what was most unnerving was that he had my manuscript sitting on the desk in front of him in a huge orange box in which I'd sent it. And I was expecting at any moment he would say, well, now that I've read it, it's just too weird, there's nothing I can do with it, and push it back at me. And instead, he said, well, the thing about Freddie Forsyth and Tony Hillerman and those guys, and Robbie Davies, is that they're all great storytellers. He laid a hand on the box and smiled at me and said, and you're another one? Thank you very much. Yeah, well, at this point, I was so gratified I did gather enough wits together to ask him, and he said, oh, well, I'm sending it out today to 5 editors who I think might like it. And he explained who these 5 editors were and what he thought they might each like about the book and all that. And I was very excited, and I said, well, cool. I said, how long do you think we might need to wait for an answer? Because I'd been reading Writer's Market and hearing, 18 months, 2 years, whatever. And he said, oh, I'm telling them all I want an answer in 30 days. I'm thinking, well, you picked the right agent. So I went home to wait for 30 days. And instead, 4 days later, I got a call on my answering machine. He said, this is Perry. I just called to update you about your manuscript. And I was thinking, well, of the 5 he sent it to, at least one of them has said, here, I'm not reading a 10-pound book, take it back. And so I called up expecting to hear that. And he said, well, of the 5 I sent it to, so far, 3 of them have called back with offers to buy it. So he negotiated amongst them for 2 weeks, emerged with a 3-book contract, and bang, I was a novelist. Yeah, this is probably a good point for me to pause and have another swallow of Diet Coke. I thought before we concluded this part of the festivities, you might like to hear a short excerpt from Book 9. Yeah, I always like to read a little bit to let people feel they've had a genuine literary experience. Anyway, as you may suppose from that, there actually is a Book 9. And as to the question, when will it be out? The answer is, I would be home writing it if I weren't here talking to you. So it's all your fault. Okay, this is a brief excerpt from an untitled book. It hasn't got any kind of title as yet. It's just Book 9. And I will try to read fairly slowly for the sake of the interpreter. But anyway, it does not have spoilers in it, or at least you won't. There may be one, but you won't recognize it, so it doesn't matter. I was somewhere deeper than dreams, and came to the surface like a fish hauled out of water, thrashing and flapping. I couldn't remember where I was, who I was, or how to speak. Then the noise that had roused me came again, and every hair on my body stood on end. Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ. Words and sense came back in a rush, and I flung out both hands, groping for some physical anchor. Sheets, mattress, bed. I was in bed, but no Jamie, empty space beside me. I blinked like an owl, turning my head in search of him. He was standing naked at the window, bathed in moonlight. His fists were clenched, and every muscle visible under his skin. Jamie! He didn't turn or seem to hear either my voice or the thump and agitation of other people in the house, also roused by the howling outside. I could hear Mandy starting to wail in fear, and her parents' voices running into each other in the rush to comfort her. I got out of bed and came up cautiously beside Jamie, though what I really wanted to do was dive under the covers and pull the pillow over my head. That noise! I peered past his shoulder, but bright as the moonlight was, it showed nothing in the clearing before the house that shouldn't be there. Coming from the wood, maybe, trees and mountain were an impenetrable slab of black. Jamie, I said more calmly, and wrapped a hand firmly around his forearm. What is it, do you think? Wolves? A wolf, I mean? I hoped there was only one of whatever was making that sound. He started at the touch, swung round to see me, and shook his head hard, trying to shake off something. He began, voice hoarse with sleep, and then he simply put his arms round me and drew me against him. I thought it was a dream. I could feel him trembling a little and heard him and held him as hard as I could. Sinister Celtic words like banshee and cask were fluttering round my head, whispering in my ear. Custom said that a banshee howled on the roof when someone in the house was about to die. Well, it wasn't on the bloody roof, at least. Are your dreams usually that loud? I asked, wincing at a fresh ululation. He hadn't been out of bed long. His skin was cool, but not chilled. Sometimes. He gave a small, breathless laugh and let go of me. A thunder of small feet came down the hallway, and I hastily flung myself back into his arms as the door burst open, and Jem rushed in, Fanny right behind him. Brenda, there's a wolf outside. It'll eat the piggies. Fanny gasped and clapped a hand to her mouth, eyes round with horror. Not at thought of the piglet's imminent demise, but at the realization that Jamie was naked. I was shielding as much of him from view as I could with my nightgown, but there wasn't a great deal of nightgown, and there was a great deal of Jamie. Go back to bed, sweetheart, I said as calmly as possible. If it's a wolf, Mr. Fraser will deal with it. Loving thanks, Sassenach, he whispered out of the corner of his mouth. Thanks a lot. Jem, throw me my play die. Jem, to whom a naked grandfather was a routine sight, fetched the plate from its hook by the door. Can I come and help kill the wolf? He asked hopefully. I could shoot it. I'm better than that. He says so. "It's no wolf," Jamie said briefly, swallowing his loins in faded tartan. "The two of you go and tell Mandy it's all right before she brings the roof down about her ears." The howling had grown louder, and so had Mandy's in hysterical response. From the look on her face, Fanny was all set to join them. Bree appeared in the door, looking like Michael Archangel, all flowing white robe and ferocious hair, with Roger's sword in her hand. Fanny let out a small whimper at the sight. "What were you planning to do with that, Linian?" Jamie inquired, nodding at the sword as he prepared to pull his shirt over his head. "I didn't think you could run a ghost through." Fanny looked goggle-eyed from Bree to Jamie and sat down on the floor with a thump and buried her head in her knees. Jem was goggle-eyed too. "A ghost?" he said blankly. "A ghost, Wolf?" I glanced uneasily at the window, where the moonlight limned the panes of glass with a faint blue glow. Jemmy was old enough to have heard of werewolves, and the word conjured up an unpleasantly vivid picture in my own mind, as a particularly desolate and penetrating moan pierced the momentary silence. "I told you it's no wolf," Jimmy said, sounding both cross and resigned. "It's a dog." "Rollo?" Jimmy exclaimed in tones of horror. "He's come back?" Fanny jerked her head up wide-eyed. Bree made an involuntary noise, and just as involuntarily I grabbed Jamie's arm again. "Jesus Christ," he said rather mildly under the circumstances, and detached my grip. "I doubt it." But I'd felt the wiry hairs on his arm bristling at the thought, and my own skin rippled into goose flesh. "Stay here," he said briefly, and turned toward the door. Callously abandoning Bree to deal with the children's conniptions, I followed him. Neither of us had paused to light a candle, and the stairwell was dark and cold as an actual well. The howling was muffled here, though, which was a slight relief. "You're sure it's a dog?" I said to Jamie's back. "I am," he said. His voice was firm, but I heard him swallow, and a thread of uneasiness tightened down my back. He turned left at the foot of the stair and went into the kitchen. I let out my breath as the stored warmth of the big room flowed over me. The smoored hearth glowed faintly, showing the comfortably rounded, solid shapes of cauldron and kettle hanging in their places, the faint gleam of pewter on the sideboard. The door was bolted. Despite the snug feeling of the kitchen, my scalp stirred uneasily. The sound was louder now, rising and falling in a rhythm much at odds with my own breathing. I couldn't tell for sure, but I thought it was louder, closer than it had been. Jamie had thrust a faggot into the embers of the hearth. He pulled it out now and blew carefully on the ragged end of the torch until a small flame rose from the glowing wood. His frown relaxed as the fire took, and he smiled briefly at me. "Dinna fashion, Ian," he said. "It's no but a dog, truly." I smiled back, but there was still an uncertain note in his voice, and I quickly picked up the stone rolling pin as I followed him to the door. He lifted the heavy bar and set it down, then lifted the latch without hesitation and pulled the door open. The cold damp of a mountain night swept in, fluttering my nightdress and reminding me that I ought to have put on my cloak. There wasn't time for that, though, and I bravely followed Jamie out onto the back stoop. The noise was louder out here, but suddenly seemed less agitated. It settled into something like an owl's cry. I scanned the hillside that rose behind the house, but couldn't see anything in the faint flicker of the torch. Despite being so exposed, I felt steadier. Jamie might have his own doubts, but he didn't think this mysterious dog was dangerous, or he wouldn't be letting me stand here with him. He sighed deeply, put 2 fingers in his mouth, and gave a piercing whistle. The noise stopped. "Well, come on then," he said, raising his voice a little, and gave a second, softer whistle. The woods were silent, and nothing happened for the space of a minute or more. Then something moved. A blot detached itself from the bushes round the privy and came slowly toward us. I heard feet coming down the distant stairs and the muffled sound of voices, but all my attention was focused on the dog. For a dog it was. I caught a glimpse of golden eyes glowing in the dark, and then it was close enough to see the shambling, long-legged gait and the sinuous curve of backbone and tail. "A hound?" I said. "It is." Jamie handed me the torch, sank onto his haunches, and stretched out a hand. The dog, it was what they called a blue-tick hound, with a heavy dappling of blue-black spots over most of its coat, seemed to sink a little as it came to him, head low. "It's all right, Ian," he said to the dog, his voice low and husky. "You know this dog?" "I do," he said, and I thought there was a note of regret in his voice. He stroked her head, though, and she came up close, tail wagging tentatively. "She's starving, poor thing," I said. The hound's ribs were visible even by torchlight, her belly drawn up like a purse string. "Have we a bit of meat, Cessna?" "I'm sure we do." The others were in the kitchen, but had stopped talking, hearing our voices outside. They'd be out here in a moment. "Jamie," I said, and laid a hand on his bare back. "Where did you see this dog before?" I felt him swallow. "I left her howling on her master's grave," he said quietly. "Did I mention it to the bairns, eh?" Thank you so much, and I believe this gentleman is going to now ask me questions on your behalf.
Yes, exactly. This one, the first one, leads off of your own introduction, how you got started. When your characters speak to you, have any of them taken you in a direction you did not want to go or made things annoyingly complicated?
Well, it could be argued that I make things annoyingly complicated for them. No, I don't write with an outline, I don't write in a straight line, and it would never occur to me to try to make them do anything they didn't want to do. If they set off in some direction, I assume they have a good reason, and I just go along.
If you could change or rewrite any particular character or scene, which one would you choose and why?
Well, I can't think that there is any scene, or certainly no character that I would change. I would rewrite the Gallic in the first 2 books because I didn't have a good translator for that. It's all very clumsy, but other than that, I don't think I'd change anything.
Was there ever a time you were jealous of Claire? If so, when and why?
No. I mean, really, no. I mean, who do you think Claire is?
I swear to you, I actually have a name on this card. Someone actually wasn't. Which relationship in your books have you wished you could have or would like to develop further?
Well, I'm sorry I missed that because I was looking at the name on the book.
Still stuck on that last question, aren't you?
Yes. Anyway, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Which relationship in your books have you wished you could have or would like to develop further?
Ooh. Well, I don't know. I pretty much developed them all as far as I want to. There's a lot remaining, of course, to be developed. Plainly, the relationship between Jamie and William has not come to his fruition. And, there might be a few others here and there. Fanny, for instance, Ian and Rachel, they've only begun their married life. For that matter, Jenny and Jamie, who are, sort of reunited in the same household for the first time in 50 years. And, they may have a few things to say to each other along the way. Almost any character who's still alive has relationships still to be pursued.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself, either during the creative process or when the book went to TV?
A surprising thing? I have a lot more stamina than I thought I did.
Do you ever dream about the stories you're writing or about particular characters?
No, I never do. I have very boring dreams. They're all about rocks and water. No, these are classic artist dreams. If you dream about rocks, it's kind of a building dream. You're climbing the rocks and so forth, or you're piling up rocks. It's a laborious thing you're involved in, but you're fully focused on it. And water is a visionary thing. If the water is clear and limpid, this is a good omen. You can see things in it. It's a vision source. If it's murky and so forth, that means you're having a hard time with whatever you're dealing with, either in your personal life or your work. Yeah, so I always dream about rocks and water.
If you lived in the 18th century, what would you miss the most from the 21st?
Oh, what would I miss the most from the 21st century? Probably red chili. I'd have to import it from Peru or something.
When writing Dragonfly and Amber, at what point during the process did you decide to start with Brianna and then flash back, and why did you make that choice?
Well, I'm not sure when I decided that. As I say, I don't write with an outline, so I don't plan the books ahead of time. They kind of evolve organically, and as they do this, they develop a shape, which I can see. Now, I knew that the main part of the story, of course, continued from where Outlander ended. On the other hand, I knew how Dragonfly ended. And I was thinking, well, how am I going to get from here to there and explain this? And I knew that because Claire was pregnant at the end of Outlander. Obviously, we were going to have a baby in the next book. Didn't know anything about this kid, I knew she was a girl just because Jamie had said, name him Brian. And I thought, boy, are you in for a surprise? Anyway, small children are just not that interesting, unless they're yours, in which case they're fascinating, but other people's children. Anyway, so I did not want to have Brianna on stage all of the time as this little brat going, mommy, 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 during all the big parts of the story. And, you know, if that wasn't happening, then Clara would not be being a natural mother. And, you know, if she was parking the kid with the 18th century equivalent of daycare, people would be complaining right and left. Oh, you know, she's so cold, she's so harsh, you know, why is she always being selfish and so forth? Because they do that anyway. As I say, think a little bit about who Clara is before you make that kind of remark to me. But I should add one other thing there, having mentioned, you know, twice who do you think Clara is. Everybody assumes that Clara is me, which, you know, she is, who else would she be? But the thing is, I am all the people in my books. And who else would I be? Including a few of the rather nastier ones, you know, Rob Cameron, Stephen Bonnet. And once I was having tea with a group of readers who got started on the character of Black Jack Randall. They were saying, oh, he's so lonesome, he's such scum, he makes my skin crawl. I'm sitting there sipping my Earl Grey and thinking, I have no idea you're talking to Black Jack Randall.
This question came with a PS, and I'm actually going to read the PS first because I think it probably is a sentiment that would be echoed by almost everybody here. The PS is, I adore you and the fierceness you've instilled in Claire and Brianna.
Oh, thank you very much.
And then the question is, aside from your current writings, what novel have you recently fallen for?
Oh, let's see. Phil Rickman's series of novels is great. He's one of my very favorite authors. He has this lovely series, 12 books in it already. And his main character is set on the Welsh border between Wales and England, very evocative. He writes beautifully about the landscape. It's a character there, just as the Scottish landscape is a character in my books. And, you know, lovely lyrical writing, great dialogue, great characters. His main character is Beryl Watkins, who is a widowed Anglican vicar and with an obnoxious teenage daughter. And she's also the official exorcist for the Diocese of Hereford. Obviously, we have a lot of conflict potential here. Anyway, the books are ostensibly crime novels, but there's this strong thread of the supernatural running through them. A lot of, you know, deep and deeply engaging human relationships. And at the bottom of all the books, there's this continuing sort of conversation, almost subliminal, about the place of belief in a secular society. You know, because Merle is, you know, constantly trying to get people to come to church and deal with their spiritual issues, and at the same time is well aware that most of society thinks what she does is insane. And so there's this back and forth all the time. She's constantly asking herself, you know, do I really believe? And having to answer, yes, I do, because she can see these things happening on the other side. And if that other side is there, then her side is also there.
Who would you cast as Lord John Grey? Maybe Billy Magnuson?
I have the faintest idea what he looks like, so no. I don't, I have to subscribe, I don't even subscribe to People magazine, I buy it at the grocery store, but I do so because I otherwise would have no idea who people were talking to when they asked me about, when they asked me questions like that. No, I have the slightest idea.
I will tell you, we Googled him.
Yeah?
Backstage.
Yeah.
He could do it. Do you ever get so emotional while writing a scene that you have to take a break from writing for a while?
Oh, no. I do get deeply emotional about, you know, the scenes that one would expect one to get emotional about. This is one reason I write late at night. The main reason is that it's quiet, nobody interrupts me. But the other is that it really disturbs my family to come in and find me with tears rolling down my face. But no, when I'm writing an emotional scene, I am totally in it and I'm not letting go until it's finished. You know, that scene is talking to me. You never interrupt a good scene when it's talking to you. So, you know, I will be in it until it's done. And at that point, you know, it's all catharsis and everything is great.
This is a two-parter, sort of about your invented world. Is Tom Christie a traveler, or was Malva? Malva's child is described as having a blue glow in Claire's hands, like Dr. McGowan.
Oh, no, it's Claire's hands that have the blue glow. It's not the kid. Yeah, no, Tom Christie is, he would be shocked at the very idea.
Do certain stone circles always deposit the traveler at another fixed location, or might a traveler end up anywhere?
No, I am reasonably sure that a stone circle marks a particular vortex where ley lines cross, and so you would not travel through space by going into one, but only through time, I think. There's no handbook, you know.
You have said you don't outline, but write where the story takes you. But this questioner wonders, do you then go back after you've written a book or first draft to do an after-the-fact outline of significant plot points, characters, or other information to use as reference when continuing the story in a new book?
Let me ask you this. When you roll over in bed in the morning, how do you know the man next to you is your husband? How would I forget what happened to this book? I mean, the answer is no. I truly don't write with an outline. I don't write in a straight line. I write where I can see things happening, and then I glue these things together. And I really do think in shapes. Once that book has achieved its shape, I will never forget it.
Does Claire ever meet her ancestors in the 18th century?
She hasn't yet.
Oh.
I'll leave it.
Well, how would I know? I don't find them ahead of time. She might not.
Have you heard of, this is kind of off the wall, I think, but have you heard of purple honey that occurs in North Carolina, and can it make an appearance in future books?
Well, now that I've heard of it, it can, yeah.
Okay, so those are our questions, selected from those
Thank you
that
so
you all
much.
submitted. Now we are going to adjourn to the lobby for autographs and picture taking. The rules, one autograph per person on one book. We will have volunteers and staff out there with stickies and things like that, so you can write your name on it and not have to repeat that and get it spelled exactly correct, and you won't look at it later and see your name misspelled and be shocked and horrified. We also ask that if you wanted to have a picture taken, that you let one of our staff take it while she's signing, so you can be there with her at the time and have the picture without holding everybody up. The bookstore's open and we'll be selling books, and you'll have time to go buy some